Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Claudia Llanza from Travesía 4 Gallery, and I'm coordinating the Bajo el Sol project along with my colleague Andrea Zelda, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to this fifth episode. We are very honored that artists Naama Tsabar and Mateo López are joining us from New York and Bogota, respectively. And we are also very, very happy and thankful to our partners from South-South who are collaborating with us for the second time and who have made possible to have this conversation open and live. Bajo el Sol is a series of film conversations and a communication platform conceived by Travesía 4 last summer. We are interested in being a platform for voices that analyze and transform today's world and return social, artistic, and technological models from the context of the Global South. Naama Tsabar and Mateo López are both currently showing their artworks in a group exhibition titled Bajo el Sol, which is inspired by these thoughts that I just mentioned in Madrid. And it's an exhibition that will last until the next 30th of July. The show focuses on the bodily potentials of and in the artist's works as instruments to deconstruct the processes of artistic creation from a Eurocentric system and from the language of art. Naama Tsabar was born in 1982 in Tel Aviv. She lives and works in New York. Tsabar's practice fuses elements from sculpture, music, performance, and architecture. Her interactive works expose hidden spaces and systems, reconceive gendered narratives, and shift the viewing experience to one of active participation. Mateo López was born in 1978 in Bogota, Colombia. He's a multidisciplinary artist who's based between Bogota and New York City. His practice speaks of cartographies, journeys, and construction processes while revolving around themes of chance, encounter, time, and the connection of events that take place in our daily life. His work traces a conceptual approach and expands from drawings to installations, architecture, films, and sculptural choreographies. So thank you very, very much, Naama and Mateo, for being here with us. I know it's the second time you meet, and we are looking forward to hear this conversation between you. I want to tell everyone else that we will upload this conversation to our YouTube channel, Bajo el Sol, which I invite you to follow. It will be, the conversation will be in English, and we will add Spanish subtitles to it in a few weeks. And thanks again, everyone, for being here. And to South-South, I'm going to let Naama Tsabar and Mateo López continue.
Good. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Claudia. And thank you for pronouncing my name so perfectly.
Sorry. I want to add, if anyone has any questions, you can write them down in the chat. We will read them out to Naama and Mateo later so they can answer them. Now, bye-bye. Thank you.
Good.
So, Mateo.
So, how are you? How you been?
I've been, it's warm. It's been good, and it's been good. How about you? How are things in Bogota?
Good. Things are good here. I guess that the vacation for some people is coming. People are leaving the city, and I'm staying here in Bogota, planning to travel after somewhere in August or September. But it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been following your work.
Likewise.
I guess by coincidence we work with the same gallery in South Africa with Goodman Gallery. Mm-hmm. And I've been following your work, and it's quite interesting, I have to say. And I guess I'm gonna open the conversation with this idea of Bajo el Sol, what it means, Bajo el Sol, under the sun.
Yeah.
If you want to comment something on the
I think
title.
It's a great place to start, and I've also been quite interested and intrigued with your work, and I'm happy we get this opportunity, for however awkward it is, to perform our first interactions. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about Bajo el Sol. I think it, for me, from Israel, being born in Israel, moving to New York. I was first thing, I think about the soul, is the sun itself, and the qualities of it in different places. And one of my most vivid memories just before leaving Israel in 2008 was as I was biking to my studio. Israel, for those who don't know, is a furnace. It's extremely hot, sometimes humid, sometimes very dry. But the sun is pounding, and I was wearing like a tank top and nothing, the minimum I could in order to have ventilation. And I was just thinking how hot I was and how sweaty I was and how I'm gonna miss it, And it's because there's something about it that makes, about the sun in that scenario, that makes you feel alive, that makes you feel present, that makes you feel in your body, however uncomfortable it may be. Ironically, today in New York is a very similar day. But I also was thinking about the sun in relation to transparency, which is, I think, something that for me in my practice is very interesting, and just in life, and thinking about the transparency within our process, within the exhibiting of our process, and also the place that it meets the viewer. And I think as I look at your work and art and practice, I feel like there's that very much integral part to your practice as well. Yeah, where does that take you, Bajo el Sol?
Well, now I'm located at 2,600 above the sea level, so you can you can guess that I'm closer to the sun, but it's higher and the altitude is more intense. I was born here in Bogota, grew up in Bogota, and then in 2014 moved to New York and I lived there for 7 years, and the sun was different. The light was more intense, and I like that. Different to Bogota, which I guess is more cloudy. It rains a lot. It's not like we have seasons. We keep the same kind of weather all year long because, of course, we're located near to the equatorial line. So time here feels different. You see the leaves on the trees all year long,
Yeah.
And that is different. I feel the time in that sense kind of is different to a place where seasons, like, I don't know, the US, New York, or Europe,
100%,
you can sense that the seasons very strong. And it's like every season you change the way you dress, the way you work, the heating, the air conditioning,
Yeah.
And I guess that brings an idea of how to say, like a reboot on the system, which is different that here, for example, in the South, it's a timeline, like a flat line going through.
Yeah.
And I guess now I'm back in Bogota after, again, 7 years. I moved during the pandemic, and we stay with my wife, Janina, here in Bogota. And what I've been doing is like trying to travel back and forth to New York, in between Bogota and New York, and keep the work doing. But somehow I reconnect here with the context of Colombia, with the territory, and I guess this idea of the sun coming from the kind of the stories from the indigenous communities about the perception of and relation with the sun. And the sun is always very present for these myths and stories and kind of gods in the indigenous communities. So it's interesting to describe the sun from this location.
Yeah. It's interesting, you know, because as you talk, I feel, I mean, I went through the same transition moving from Israel, which has no seasons, and thinking, you know, how much I love seasons, because it makes you understand your own cycle of death and rebirth, as you said. But also thinking about, you know, about the sun and how it is more and more considered a threatening thing, even though it is the reason of life. But it will also be the reason for its, you know, demise. And it's an interesting thing to think about this one thing that can, you know, generate life and also take it away. And I think, you know, that in relation to seasons is quite an interesting juxtaposition. Also thinking about mental kind of states as a person, being connected to something outside of yourself in such a direct way, which is something that, you know, since moving to New York, I really understand this optimism and this pessimism and all these things that seem so banal, you know, that are like in literature for years. And we, you know, coming from Israel, it's not something that I could really relate to or really understand fully, but now, you know, can completely connect and relate to. And it's interesting how the place we are is really sips into how we feel, our state of mind, and then of course also to what we do. And within that, the sun is a location, even though it's the same sun for all of us. And I think that's, you know, I was thinking about your work, and in that relation to actually, you know, you studio practice and fabrication. Well, you know, I have a few questions for you, since, you know, we're fresh and we just met. But maybe I'll start with this, because I was thinking about your practice and it being kind of like really local in a way, you know, working, because as I understand, Mateo, and correct me if I'm wrong, you produce a lot of your projects with local artisans. And and I was thinking about, I wanted to hear from you, like this, if there's a shift and a change, you know, you lived 7 years in New York, and here, you know, the idea of artisan is really eroded, perhaps, because there's such a level of professionalism and consumerism and a market that the stamp of the person making the work should be erased as much as possible for the work to be, you know, of worth, or, you know, something that is usable for others. And I think, you know, when we talk about artisans and people and crafts people in other places, that is perhaps the complete opposite. And I was thinking, you know, in relation to York, how does that differ? Do you, when you live in New York rather than now in Bogota, in your own like practice?
Yeah. So I guess I describe my work as, again, as a timeline. It's mostly drawing, and then drawing kind of get lost, go around, continue that line, and then reconnect. So I guess it's something about journeys, about displacement, about travel, you know. And then when I moved to New York, I kind of, when I was producing work in New York, I was connecting to that feeling of discovering a complete new city for me, and then start producing work, finding the right materials to work. That was fun, kind of connect with New York in a different way, not as a tourist, more like doing your own map of the people that you want to work or the materials that you need for work. That was interesting. And then you find amazing places, like completely hidden from other layers of the city.
Sure.
And I have to say that after living there, I kind of approach that idea of working with a high level of production, like, you know, high standards,
Yeah.
and very sharp way of doing something, you know. And I guess it was a completely different experience after, I mean, working here. I was telling you the time working with a, I don't know, like a fabricator, you need to deliver the plans perfectly drawn. You know, there is no questions around. You send and then you receive back after some time the piece fabricated, which is interesting, but there is something missing for me. There is some soul missing.
Yeah.
And that is something that perhaps you can share with an artisan or working from someone from a different location, a different economy, a different industry. And I guess countries like Colombia or countries from South America, we as artists produce different. I mean, we have different questions when you are in front of the material or the people that you are going to work with. And I guess it's important to also to say something about the material that you're working with. I guess when you talk about politics or you're trying to say that your work deals with politics, I don't believe that needs to be like literal in a literal way. I guess there is something about the material that can tell a lot of things, where this material is coming from, the people who kind of transform that matter somehow has a lot to say. And I kind of like that, to work with people, and because you create sort of a relation, you build a community, and then these people is kind of pushing you to other boundaries, but also you're pushing other people to other boundaries of creation, like perhaps an artisan that, I don't know, fabricate baskets, like a series of baskets. I guess he can be bored of producing the same basket, but if you ask him to do like a, I don't know, another shape with another purpose, I guess you're pushing a little bit the boundary of that craft. So I guess there is two ways impact on that experience of working with artisan and producing in locations or contexts like Colombia.
Yeah, it's do you because you know the work is, you know, it comes from a conceptual backbone, right? Do you include any reference to the artisans themselves in it, or is there like any? Yeah,
I always try, for example, on the title, I have the title and then the location where it's coming from, like the kind of the state or the place where this location, or include the name of the artisan of course on the credits of the work. If you have the curiosity to know to know a little bit more of where this material is coming from. I think it's important. It's important to include other people in your practice and not become the artist that is one name, one, you know, one statue, like
appropriate everything.
Yeah. No, this is you're part of a community, and it's not only artisans. It's like videographer, editor, dancers, choreographers, and which I guess you're pretty much involved on that field. You're inviting people to activate your work and be part of your installations as well. And I really want to know more about that, like how you conceive this idea of working with people and bringing people into the not a stage but the exhibition space.
I think the idea of locality is something that we're both kind of touching upon, but in this conversation, and it's something perhaps we can talk a bit more about, because I think when we met first, it was 2 days ago, 3 days ago, for a brief kind of hello, and you know, we were both artists that worked or work outside of for an extended amount of time outside of where we were born, and this idea of home and locality, and you know, roots perhaps, and stuff like that is really kind of ever changing and shifting, at least for me. And thinking about locality and working, you know, you explain this idea of working with these artisans and including them also somewhere in the work, referencing it's also a sort of a map of your timeline, your own timeline, sort of a line, you know. But also thinking for me, you know, I travel from place to place with my work. I produce my work in the studio predominantly. And so with that in mind, you know, my work is kind of, there is of course materials, and they're you know, where they come from and their associations and their art historical kind of references and personal references at play. And but at the end of the day, the sculptures get made in the studio, and they leave the studio, and so it's a kind of close conversation. And for me, it was interesting when I thought about kind of taking the work out of the studio and having the work be able to be still active after that moment in the studio when things are happening. You know, it is the moment of action, the moment of things moving, the energy, thinking about how do I export that outwards, so it doesn't just sit in the exhibition space like you know, a corpse of what has happened. And one of the ways that one of my course of action is to have it be interactive in a way that, you know, anybody can interact with it. And that interaction by default creates, you know, a history for the work, right? At that specific moment. And it's a history, and it's also about control, you know, and I think control is something every artist can talk about. It's like, there's no artist that doesn't think about control and have issues with it. And so, you know, all the control that is happening in the studio is in a way just to create a system to let go a bit of the control. And even that's hard, you know, but it's a way to force that into the work. And so this interaction in a specific place is out of my hands in many ways. And the viewers can interact with it. And, you know, within that, every place I show the work, there's different levels of interaction, which I find interesting. Some places the interaction is very minimal. And I think it's because there is more, well, perhaps more boundaries and borders between one's body and the art object. And in some places it's quite radical. And then, you know, other than the gallery goers interacting with the work, there is another layer in my practice of performance. And that's where I get to the idea of locality, you know, and working with local communities and trying to really work with local communities in a collaboration. So in a way, this idea of coming to a place and looking for a community that's already there. So it's almost like, I think about it like almost like it's like a ready-made almost, you know. It's nothing invented, you know, nothing invented. These are people that are completely active and completely doing their thing in a specific place. It's just that the action is just gathering them in one space with an odd object and a string, you know, and then see what happens through that. But each place, because of that, it really yields different results. And the things that come into it are different. This brings me back to Argentina in 2018, where I did this performance with broken guitars and work with 8 amazing local musicians. And it was right after a vote to keep abortion illegal, and there was a lot of protest, a lot of anger, you know. And there's also, you know, a specific color that was associated with this resistance and this kind of protest, and it was green. And I remember we talked about it a lot through our rehearsal process, and also brought on like this, our fingernails were all green, everybody. So it was like also a silent protest within the performance itself. You know, and what I should also say is that as much as I go to a place and kind of work with a community, I do choose the community. So that my voice is there. You know, I work with female identifying and gender non-conforming musicians solely. But then jumping to 2022, Kino Saito, my latest performance, right after a few days before everybody knew that the Supreme Court will strike down Roe. And that performance with completely different performers, also talking about the rage and the anger and the politics, you know, of the moment, of us losing a right over our own bodies, and that kind of like generating the performance. And it's the same body of work, but 2 completely different performances. But one, you know, in Argentina, one in upstate New York, and how the same political issue, with different people, with the same work, generates 2 completely different performative outcomes. And I think that is a place where I'm completely very, very interested in. For me, it's a place of complete gratification, because it has less to do with me and more with the people I work with. And for that reason, I consider my performances a complete collaboration. Like, it is never Naama Tsabar, you know?
And also the idea that the work is alive and is happening on real time and is having a relation to the place where the work is being shown, and then it absorbs the context of where the work is presented. That's interesting. Ideally, I mean, the work we do should happen that like it's on real time and is people kind of being part of the object. I like what you said about control, and for me it's the same thing, because I have a background on architecture. I did 2 years of architecture and quit, and then moved to art school. But I keep drawing as an architect. I use the tools, the ruler, the compass. You know, I do a lot of the prototypes, like cardboard prototypes and all. So the work is precise, and is about control and being accurate, like sharp. And then I kind of need this idea of losing control. And then I kind of discovered that through some of the work, that if you present the artwork, and the artwork, let's say the piece can be active and can be transformed and can change, and someone can play with it, then you're losing control. I'm losing control. And that helped me a lot, as personally, but also as an artist, like let it go. And it's really interesting when you're working with dancers and choreographers. It's a conversation, and then you present the idea, present the object, and then you put it on a plate, and they react and activate this piece in many ways that you cannot expect. And that I love, kind of that of losing control and then creating this conversation through a middle something which is a piece, you know. And there is also something about control, and I want to ask you, when you present these works and this idea that the artwork, the piece, can be touched, can be moved by the audience, how you deal with that, with the gallery context and the gallery and the museum and the gallery, knowing that there is something about conservation, and there is something about liability and insurance that is always kind of destroy this utopia of kind of bringing art to the people and having a horizontal conversation. What's your
it's interesting. It's an interesting relationship between worth and life. And you know, I know that as my work gets more valuable and monetary, it will have less of a life. You know, there's a relationship between the market and how valuable an object is, and how much I think, you know, even for insurance reasons, when a space shows a work maybe in 30 years, perhaps the insurance will not allow, will not let it be that wear and tear is not acceptable, because it will deteriorate, take away from the worth of the work. But so I think that's a really fucked up relationship that the art world has, where life is actually not celebrated, but actually, you try to preserve like the moment, that it went out, and you want it always to look like that moment, even though our bodies deteriorate all the time, and even what, I won't go so deep, even what we perceive as classical is not really classical, is it? Because it's already like fused by if we think about classical architecture and like everything being white and this idea of white, and there's a show now in the Metropolitan that kind of like simulates how the colors that actually were at play. And so I think that's super interesting, because we have a very pristine idea of white, and I think that's related to this architecture and a classicism of sorts that's distorted, of course. But the way I try to write wear and tear into my work, there's different kinds. There's straight up like things breaking. And then there's a conservation that needs to take place, because the work no longer exists as a functional sculpture. But I had a performance, one of my first performances with this body of work I have called the Work on Felt. It was a big work on felt, the number 2. It was on the floor, and it was in the Guggenheim, and we were 3 performers performing on this one felt. It could hold us. It was almost like a stage. And one of the performers had this like really nice new blue jeans. The work was gray. And she was drumming, and she was sitting on the felt, and her body was moving back and forth on it, and as it was doing that, in hindsight, it was completely leaving the image of this likely, beautiful blue jeans onto the felt. And there was a moment when I looked at it and I said, okay, shit. It's now there's a blue stain, but but actually, in a way, for me, after processing and letting go a bit of this control that we're talking about, it is perhaps even more valuable in my sense, because it's a history ingrained in the work. And so this wear and tear is actually the history of activation and the history that the work takes on. And for that, in my mind, should actually just increase the valuable nature of the work. Since it gains this history. Oh, sorry, there's like, I don't know if you heard that.
What was that?
Crazy. It's been very, very hot and very sunny, and all of a sudden, like New York it just got super dark, and there's like a crazy storm outside. I think the heat is breaking.
Yeah.
Talking about the sun going.
Yeah. No, I like that what you said about the stories, but it's also stories like anecdotes that each work has, and those anecdotes are always included when you're producing something, when you're working in something that is the part of the creative process, that you take decisions of on basis on these anecdotes, how it changed the work, it happens to me as well many times. A few years ago, actually, that I was was working on paper a lot and cardboard. That it happens sometimes here in museums that people kind of wrote notes on the drawings, because I was kind of presenting like these notebooks with drawings, and it's natural when you see a notebook, like you write something, and these museums are like they bring a lot of kids, so it's kind of also interesting to know how people kind of relate and what is the experience inside a museum or a gallery space. I'm always curious about that, how you navigate. I guess it's coming from my architecture background, how you navigate space, how you relate, and also when you are thinking on this installation, how you present the work, you create sort of a map of how the visitor can navigate and relate to the subject. You think how you imagine what you do when you are planning an installation or an exhibition, if you think how the visitor, how the audience will interact there inside the space?
I try not to. I think it's a bit pretentious to think like that.
Controlling again.
Yes, just like, okay, let's,
I'm sorry, happens.
No, completely, to me too. I try to let go of the expectations. I think that's where it is, of interaction. I also don't allow there to be signs saying, please touch the work.
Yeah.
Usually it's insinuated that interaction is allowed. Mm-hmm. Also in texts, I always the words that I correct, and it's 90% of the text is the artist invites the viewers to interact. I never invite anybody. It's there. For me, it's a platform. I think the action of choosing to cross this border, this invisible border between yourself and the work, is an important part of the viewing experience, and becoming from a viewer to a participator. And I think that has to be taken individually and alone, ideally, as a decision that one makes on their own. I think that's what for me is an interesting. So my expectations, I try not to think about them, and sometimes it's for the worse. Sometimes perhaps I recently had a show in the Bass Museum in Miami with this new body of work called Inversion, where it's cavities inside the actual architecture that can be activated through penetration of body parts, hands, head, and there's sensors inside that activate files that change with your movement. And I guess I didn't realize the how much activation would happen. And I thought it was, I didn't realize. And then with that in mind, you don't think also about, what is the museum goer wearing? What jewelry do they have? Where am I showing this? It was in Miami Beach, so it's, it's a specific museum goer. So, jewelry and like watches and stuff like that would leave their imprint on the work itself by just entering the wall. And so there's places where, you know, not thinking through perhaps and having expectations is to my it's not to my advantage, to the work's advantage. It renders the work different in not a good way. But you know, it's a learning curve. I think every show is a learning curve. If you don't learn, then don't do it. You know, it's boring.
And I wanted to ask you if you think in your case, your practice, your work is an invitation for people, like to be part of this project, like this creative process, and it's an invitation. And art has the possibility or the capacity to transform. You think on that, like a transformation?
I want to believe. I think it's a very good question, and you know, it's something that I think and have been thinking for years about is art as a belief system, which, you know, I think there's many conversation and dialogues, you know, and kind of like to try and kind of break that down in contemporary practice. But for me, art is a belief system. And within that, I think there's place for transformation. Yeah.
And continuing that idea of the power of healing, as we I mean, we know we both coming from very complex countries, no?
Sure.
Like
yes.
Violence, war is present. I guess there is something that I believe there is something that the art work has the power of healing in some way, like offering you an experience of, could be like a completely abstraction from abstraction from reality, but also like commenting on something, as you were saying, that when you were doing this performance in Buenos Aires or the last performance in New York, that it's connected to something that is happening out there in the streets, has that power of you know, commenting experience, a situation through the work. I guess that's the power of healing.
I mean, I definitely, I believe in that. I believe in the power of healing without being too, like, you know, kind of like spiritual like that about it. But I think,
but spiritual is good.
Talking you know, of course,
control, and that's something that I have to say, kind of a short story when I returned to Colombia, that I start approaching the territories and having kind of a more connection with the communities, indigenous communities, that opens like a completely new path of how you imagine your art practice, coming from a different let's say, ways of understanding the world and believing in the world. And that opens like, for example, ideas of animism, coming from the anthropology, this idea of animism, that object devices has sort of life that can communicate. That's interesting. And it happened to me that having a permanent conversation with a indigenous community from the Amazon, the Colombian Amazon. They fabricate these objects, these devices meant to be used for ceremonies, and talking about masks and suits or dresses for ceremonies. And they talk about a spiritual level that we don't connect, because coming from a extremely conceptualized art practice, that is not possible to talk about or to relate. And that's something that I'm kind of trying to approach, that idea of bringing into my practice this knowledge coming from the Amazon, this knowledge coming from the territories where I'm located, and kind of making this sort of concretism or mixing knowledges from the west, from the south, you know, doing something with that. And what I'm saying is that there is something about spirituality, or there's something about other another approach to art practice that is also possible. That's what I'm talking about, healing, about
Yes.
transforming.
100%. Yeah, I definitely didn't mean, you know, spirituality. I feel like when you talk about spirituality, in my world, I just feel like I think about energy, which is one of the same, perhaps.
Well, sound is
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's a few things. Sound, yes, you know, I think sound always really interested me because for me personally, it's transformative. Through my body is transformed through sound, but also this idea of a wave transforming, you know, material that's solid and traveling through it and changing it is, and it's almost like belief, you know. It's this form of something we do not see, but has vibrations and energy, and that can change and perhaps also can heal. But you know, as you were talking, I was wondering if this kind of like dialogue and conversation and interest that you're having with, you know, with spirituality and indigenous kind of like practices, is that something that you got something pretty new for you after you came back from New York, or is it something that you already had before you left?
It was upon my return, when I returned to Colombia, because my art education kind of erased that connection to the territory and that connection to the communities. And then you realize that how colonized is your practice, how colonized is your art education. And now when I return, I mean, how can I rebuild that? How can I read again art history coming from these places, from these territories? And I guess what is important here, again, connected with this idea of the sun and the climate and the weather, there is something that we had to do as an artist to react to climate change and kind of protect and also help these communities to maintain this forest or the Amazon or the whatever,
I mean,
how you want to juggle to preserve, to keep, and also to recognize there is also knowledge in these places, like this context, that we have to recognize that we have been kind of, I mean, ignoring for ages, for centuries.
I know it's really tragic, to be honest. It's the knowledge and the relationship between human and land is really sad in the Western world, and it really doesn't give much back or at all to the land itself. And then, you know, I mean, this is it's almost like talking. It's quite alarming that that we're in a world where politicians they should all be working for the land and for the people, and they work for neither.
I guess I don't have the answer. I have not found that kind of the way to do it, but what at least I guess what I'm trying to do is to, again, I repeat, create this sort of syncretism to mix like these two boundaries, like coming from the art practice and then approaching the communities and working with them and producing work, is kind of creating this conversation. Like we both want to know or learn something from the other. And and it takes time. It takes time. It's not going there and just after one meeting or after one encounter, you just have that, because again, my head is completely, you know, colonized.
I mean, how do you unlearn something, you know?
Exactly.
How do you, I mean, as a woman as well, you know, it's for me, that is a question constantly. And I was still thinking about the place of gender within my you know, every day, what I do, the language I use, you know, how I dress, what I talk, the content, you know, the narratives I put forward, all these things, I know they are, you know, not my own at times. And it's something that I constantly need to work back and try to relearn. And, you know, that's why for me, within like, you know, the process of working with gender non-conforming and female identifying performers on instruments that have no mastering to them yet, it's a great attempt, perhaps not always successful, but it's a great attempt to try to learn in a new language, a new way of moving the body in this very specific context. I wanted to also say something about, you know, climate change and, you know, us as artists thinking about it, which is something I think about every day. And, you know, for me, kind of like working and producing in the studio, I also think constantly about the toll that my practice and sending works all over the world has on the climate, and how that could be better, and how I could be at least more knowledgeable that the work is not only worth its monetary amount, you know, in dollars, but it is also has a worth that it takes.
Yeah. I mean, if you take time off dividing your garbage, like what can be recycled, what it's, you know.
Yeah.
You can do the same thing in your studio.
Yeah, I do. I mean,
I'm not like picking the garbage. Yeah. I'm thinking about re-editing your ideas. You know, this idea of recycling ideas and not kind of keep buying materials to produce. Perhaps a work that it was shown that you can re-edit and then present it again in a different way. I don't know. This idea of recycling or re-editing is important to include in the studio practice.
I think it's one way of
it's one way.
It's one way of kind of being, at least being aware. You know, that's where it starts.
It's good. It's good. There is a lot of questions. I have to say, there is a lot of kind of, and that's what keeps you working. You know, these ideas and
it's what
finding yourself funnels, that you're not on a comfort zone. It's important.
Yeah.
You know,
it's what funnels discomfort.
Yeah.
Which we all strive to have all the time.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Ana, do you have?
No.
Hola, Claudia.
¿Qué tal? Thank you so much. It's amazing. I think it's very interesting that you both create from or originally create from this form of resistance in a way, but in a very, it's a very kind of like silent and more discreet gesture and subversion. It's not like a, you know, a practice that screams resistance. And I would like both of you, if you could elaborate a little bit more on this, and also, on the poetics of in each of your practices of what we can see and what we cannot see. And my second question would be, what thinkers, what writers, artists, musicians, or communities have inspired you? Like maybe just mention one or two references that have inspired your work in more recent times. I don't know.
Mateo, you can start. Go.
I guess resistance is a good word to mention, but not in a way as a political practice, like a political stand. I guess resistance is also make this kind of question, like why I draw, why I keep drawing, why I keep producing work in New York that it's so expensive, why don't produce work from Colombia and engage I'm sorry, the ambulance. You know, it's important to move from this comfort zone and keep doing these questions, and then these questions or answers can be solved through an object, through an artwork, and that's poetic. That's the poetic side of things, like how to say things through matter, how to say things through an artwork. And then you were saying about kind of inspiring or influence, like
just a recent influence that, especially specifically in your case, Mateo, because you relocated to New York and then you relocated to live in Colombia. If you have, you know, if you've noticed this change, you said so before that you've noticed a change in, you noticed that your mind had been colonized in a way, or that we all live with a colonized mind. If you have like a specific reference that you feel this has inspired so much my work in recent times.
I guess I've been reading recently about on anthropology, like that is also a way of a colonizing way of describing the indigenous communities and how they behave and how they produce. But it's a tool to kind of understand on one side what they say, how they relate with their practice, with their ceremonies, with the plants, with the animals, but also I learned something from the anthropology, and it's this idea of animism or approach, this idea of animism, and think this idea of animism in the art practice, the art world. We are all producing objects that have been shown in galleries and museums, but those objects have some sort of life. They're alive. They have story. They are material. They're materials transform into something else. So I guess reading on anthropology and also reading on theory on theater, and I was reading on a Brazilian director, Augusto Boal, and he was a very important figure in the 70s on theater in Brazil. He was exiled during the dictatorship from Brazil, and he lived in many countries in South America, Latin America. And he brought this idea of teatro del oprimido, theater of the oppressed, which is kind of an approach of making theater more horizontal, more democratic, and not you as a spectator being sitting a play. He brought this question of how you as a spectator can be more active and can be a kind of a character on this play. And also the kind of workshops and the theater practice he was doing, like engaging with communities and helping for them to create these plays coming from the communities, and then use this theater practice on a way to express the emotions, the situations, the political context. So it's, and then again, how you include those ideas into the exhibition space, how you engage with people, how you kind of invite people to touch and then create this horizontal conversation that we were saying into bringing this into the exhibition space. So I guess it's informed all these ideas are coming from different fields, and it's just curiosity. And yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. I guess kind of touching about what you're talking about, what we see and what we do not see. What you're asking about. That is something actually that I consider a lot and have been considering a lot. And I think this also connects to this body of work that I've been, my latest body of work inversions, which are these kind of like holes in the wall that are interactive, but beyond their interactivity, this idea of creating holes in structures as a way to say that there is something beyond where we are. There is a structure behind that's holding our experience as well in the space we are in, and there's hidden spaces within it, and those are spaces of that and activation, you know. And for me, that relates in a way to spaces of belief, to spaces that are present and absent at the same time, but are essential to everything existing. And so I think, you know, with my this body of work that the inversion works, they activate different things. Some of them have hidden string elements inside. Some of them you can sing into, and they have like microphones inside that amplify the singing, so it's almost like confessionals. But then some of them have like these sensors that pick up the actual body going into the wall, and it's a deep wall. And then there's a sound file that comes out that you hear, and that sound file is this edited file that I made of women singing, and so it's kind of like a voice that is feminine, that comes out. That then, as you move inside the space, it changes a certain characteristic of it, whether it be it can drop a scale, you know, it can drop a whole, it can get really low and can go high up, or some of them change volume level, so it can get very much in the background or very much in the front. So your action within the wall is actually activating. But this idea that the thing that we do not see and is there is what is you know, is for me interesting is this idea of the female voice, and its place and its invisibility, and that kind of connects me actually to this is not orchestrated, but is the latest article that I read, which is not a new one, but it's a good one. It's an Ann Carson essay that's called "Glass Ironing God," and it's from this book, "Glass Ironing God," and it's the essay itself is called "The Gender of Sound," which is very interesting and specifically talks about this phenomena of female voices through time, through history, being something that is considered either weak or annoying or hysteric, or you know, the actual pitch of your voice already places you in a specific category of you know, of sound mind, or sane, or in control, or and that's something that's really interesting for me. I think there's something in women voices that's really subversive, and we all have it. It's the tool that we don't, I mean, most of us can use to puncture through you know, the order that this order that we live in, that is still very much male-centric and masculine.
Can I ask something about the fold? Because I'm looking at your paper prototypes hanging on your wall behind you.
Oh yeah,
they look fantastic. I love that.
Thank you for prototypes.
And I guess for the fold is very important in my practice. One of kind of that the words can describe that the drawings I do, these drawings that become tridimensional, like sculptures, paper sculpture, cardboard sculptures, whatever. and then now transform into another material. But the fold is something present. Can you describe a little bit how the fold?
Yeah, for me, it's not a fold, to be honest. It's a resistance.
The point of resistance, like
is a point of resistance is the curve, I call it, you know,
curve.
because a page starts flat, and so the point of the resistance creates the curve. Is a resistance between the flatness of the page and the thread that goes through it, and so it's different variations of resistance, and that is very much like what I use to study this resistance, so I can then kind of take that onto my bigger works, into the works on felt.
Okay.
But the works on felt as well, these works that are on the wall or on the floor that have a piano string that creates resistance, and that resistance is also transcribed into like a form, which those works actually they travel flat. And so, which is important for me, because then you put on a string and you put on a certain length for the string, and that is the resistance of the work, you know. That is how much the material is resisting, and then, you know, there's outcomes that are sonic and sculptural within it. Yeah, because, you know, an instrument is built to resist as well, but it's also built to not conform. And with this work, there's the works on felt, the material conforms, you know, it doesn't like stay flat, like it has a movement in relation to that stress that it's put under, you know, this like pulling, it's pulling into itself. So yeah, nice. Rather than folds, resistance. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's been so interesting and amazing to hear you talk also about, you know, alternative ways of that you use to relate to the art world that we're all in and to society, and to share all of these amazing thoughts. So thank you, and I hope we can all meet sometime in person soon.
Yeah.
To keep having these conversations. And I also want to thank all the spectators who watched us tonight. And we will upload the full conversation in a few weeks to our channel. So, Bajo el Sol, which I invite you to follow. And thank you, Mateo and Naama, again.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you so much. Great conversation, Naama.
Thank you, Mateo. Yeah, and let's have a drink when I'm in Bogota and you're in New York.
Yeah, I'm going September, so
I'm here.
Save the date for a drink.
Yep, will do.
Good. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.